What's going on, guys? Okay, so today I thought we would create a 3D model of Blitz from Helluva Boss. So Helluva Boss is an absolutely hilarious web series by VivsiePop and Brendan Rogers, and of course we'll be creating this model in Blender. So without further ado, let's get started. So, of course, there are many ways you can go about creating a CG character, and my particular workflow might be different from other CG artists, but this is the one that works for me. The idea is to start out by creating a base mesh that matches the basic shape of the character as best as possible. I was lucky enough to find Blitz's turnaround sheet. Not the best of quality, but it'll certainly do. I'll of course be using this as reference to get the proportions right. To cut out the mouth from the head mesh, I used a Boolean modifier, as trying to model the entire head with a mouth in one mesh would have been a nightmare. And now for the part I suck at the most: sculpting. Unlike modeling, sculpting, as the name suggests, is very similar to creating 3D shapes with clay. It uses a brush-based user interface and is a lot more intuitive and straightforward than modeling. You don't need to worry about topology and you have access to a lot more tools, but man does it take a lot of practice to get used to. The tools I'm using here are mainly the clay strips, pinch and blob tool. Now, some CG artists, such as Polygon or DannyMac3D, are somehow able to sculpt characters and get insanely clean and smooth meshes. I, on the other hand, can't figure out for the life of me how to end up with a character that doesn't look like it survived the nuclear holocaust, so I'll have to re-topologize. I won't include the whole process because it's pretty boring, but I'm basically manually recreating a mesh by using the sculpt as support, making sure I respect the re-topology rules. If I don't, I won't be able to give the character proper facial expressions later on. And I also re-topologized the hands. In addition to being nice and smooth, a re-topologized mesh uses way less vertices than a sculpted mesh, which makes the model much more rigging and animation friendly. Now for his boots. I started out by modeling a basic shoe using a random sketch as reference. Then I tweaked it so that it would match Blitz's boots as best as possible. Of course, this particular character has a very sneaky aesthetic, and the shapes that make up his silhouette tend to end in points. So I made sure I incorporated that into the model as best as possible. Then I could start modeling his coat, again trying to stay as true to the reference as possible. Next, I sculpted his little skull necklace thing. I didn't bother giving it too much detail as it is quite small and not that noticeable. Then I could add more detail to the mesh and make sure all the key elements that make up the character are present. And the mesh is pretty much done. Because I wanted to render the character in a more interesting pose, I had to rig him. Here I'm using the Rigify add-on. This thing is an absolute lifesaver. So the idea is that you position these parent bones in the right place, and the add-on will generate an advanced rig for you with IK, FK controllers, and all sorts of awesome features. This makes animation a lot easier. And of course it's completely free, just like the entire software. Blender. Go download it now. After cleaning up the deformations with some weight painting, I could start texturing. I went with a reptile skin map texture for Blitz's skin and tweaked the hue to make it red. I gave his gloves and boots a leather texture and his coat a silk texture. All of these PBR textures are generated using mainly the principled BSDF node. Blitz's coat is all torn up, and because modeling each tear would have been an absolute nightmare, I came up with a different method. I set up this material that allowed me to paint on a transparency map. Black means 100% transparent. Then it was just a matter of painting on every tear, still trying to maintain that cartoony look. And this actually gave some fairly convincing results. And now for the main texture painting. So I'm painting on different maps that will be mixed with the original albedo map of the texture I'm painting on. Yeah, that wasn't confusing at all. Look, here's the node setup. You got it? Cool. So what this does is it allows me to paint on color without losing the normal or roughness maps of the original texture. For example, here the black and white areas still look like reptile skin. And that's pretty much how I texture painted our boy here. Of course, again, trying to stay as true to the original design as possible. Even small and seemingly meaningless details can potentially make a world of difference in the context of a particular character. Maybe in Helluva, this tiny dot means he killed a bunch of babies or something. I mean, not that I know shit about Helluva or even killing babies, but I'm sure you get the point. So yeah, of course I'm using a tablet for this, as trying to paint with a mouse usually won't get you very far. The final step is to sculpt some folds and wrinkles onto the coat, as of course, fabric never stays perfectly smooth and flat. I originally wanted to give him a few facial expressions using shape keys. I gave him a closing eyelid shape key and wanted to add keys for his mouth and eyebrows, but unfortunately I couldn't be arsed. To make for a more interesting render, I wanted to pose him holding his gun. I found this really nice model on Blend Swap and retextured it a little so that it would better match the color palette. Then it was just a matter of manipulating the bones and rig controllers to get him to stand in a nice natural pose while trying to, once again, stay true to the sneaky, almost snake-like appeal of the original character. And voila! In order to render an object, you need to set up lights, just like if you were to light an object in real life. The lighting setup I have here is quite straightforward. I have a point lamp in the foreground just to light up his face and some of his body. I have a surface lamp high up in the background to give it a theatrical look and to create some white highlights on his horns. And because of course he's a demon and lives in hell, I added a red spot lamp below him to give it a sinister, hellish vibe. And here's what that looks like in rendered view. Of course, I'm rendering this in good old cycles. And the reason why I'm able to render this in pretty much real time in cycles is because I recently built this thing. I left a list of the parts of this build in the description, but it essentially has an RTX 3080 graphics card, a 3960X 24-core CPU, and 128, definitely not overkill, gigs of RAM. And depending on when you're watching this video, that's either insane or pretty pathetic, but nevertheless, with the denoiser, I'm able to render this scene in almost real time in cycles. And even though now I'm in more debt than a college graduate in the US, it was totally worth it. And there you have it. So definitely check out Helluva Boss. It's absolutely hilarious. And, you know, especially if you like darker humor, which if you watch my channel, I assume you do. As usual, if you enjoyed the video, drop a like and subscribe for more videos just like this one. And I shall see you guys next time.